on what the opinions or what he hopes to be done, especially in country, in region, but most of all, what are the updates for Alliance for National Transformation? Let's start by getting to the general, then we'll get into prayer, then we'll dig into a topical discussion here. My name is Timothy Nyangweso, and thank you for joining this space. And whatever platform you're joining us, let it be Zoom, YouTube, or Spaces, you're very welcome. General, good evening, and how are you?
Good evening, Timothy. Thank you for hosting me again.
Thank you very much for being with us here. Yes.
I trust you are doing well as well.
I am doing well. I'm doing very well. It's a Friday, and we thank God that it's been having a bit of rain. So the hot season that had been predicted, God had a different plan here. So let's pray and get started. Lord, we thank you for today and we bless you. We pray that even as we do this space with General Mugisha Muntu, that it equips us and sharpens us. We thank you and we pray that it will be fruitful to the engagement and the pains of this country. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. General, let's dig into it straight away and get into our conversation here. First and foremost, a lot has been happening in Alliance for National Transformation. We have seen quite a number of the executive leaders touring the country, a lot of trainings. Please bring us up to speed on what's happening in Alliance for National Transformation.
Well, in the whole of 2023, we spent our time focused on the core objectives of our organization, building the grassroots infrastructure, doing the trainings of leaders, doing the outreaches to interest groups, and to a large extent, we found a number of things which were unknown before we went out and hit the ground in terms of outreaches to populations that went. We toured close to about 20 districts, and our engagements gave us an insight in how to prepare and continue the same exercise in 2024.
Yes. Please proceed,
so
General.
Starting with, by the end of February, beginning of March, we'll resume the same exercise because we intend to, at least by the end of the year, once we get the necessary resources, to cover at least 3/4 of the country.
3/4 of the country. What does that take in terms of resources? You have said resources. What is necessary to ensure that you cover 3/4 of the country? And in this covering of the 3/4 of the country, what do you intend to achieve?
There are things we do, some which are for short-term purposes, but a lot also depends on our overall objectives of a medium, long-term establishment of a strong foundation on the basis of which Alliance for National Transformation can be positioned to lead the country in a totally different direction from what we have seen hitherto since independence. Because we've had a challenge in 60+ years. We've had many leaders, many governments that have come in, but looks as if most of them were focusing on how to get into power. Looks as if most of them never understood how to manage power in terms of how to utilize it for the development purposes of the country. And that takes a lot if you don't put a lot of thinking and work in it to prepare an organization. If an organization goes into power when it is not well prepared, when it has not built leaders who think alike and who will act in concert along the very things which will bring things that make people cry out 60-something years. Good governance, basically. Because if you don't have, for example, discipline in managing national resources, if you don't establish institutions of justice, if you don't put in place practices of fairness in the equal opportunities for citizens of the country, if you don't have leaders who are focused on doing that, yes, you can get into power, as we have seen many who have, but you'll fail to translate that into tangible benefits for the population. So it takes a lot of time on our part Many people seem not to understand what that means. We are not so much concerned with that because we know that if we continue doing what we are doing, eventually the results of it will be seen, as the English say that the taste of the pudding is in the eating.
Very interesting. Thank you, General, for that update. It also brings us to a place where let's get into the domestic issues, and we're grateful for that. But what's the cost of traversing the country, especially district per district? You've been able to move into 20 districts. What's that cost, and what would you call Ugandans to be able to support Alliance for National Transformation? Why should they come behind you to support you to traverse these districts?
Our operational focus is around the sub-county. So wherever we go, we organize around the sub-county. And the highest costs are really in transportation of the teams moving all over the places where they go to. And costs going to like hiring of tents, hiring of chairs where people meet, and a bottle of water. And basically that's it, and accommodations for the teams that would be going around the country. Beyond that, normally it isn't so much. When you look at averagely the estimation of a meeting of that nature at a sub-county level, its number ranges between 2.5 million to about 3 million Uganda shillings. And we tour 2 sub-counties a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon.
And I hope Ugandans have had that call to be able to come and support this. But let's dig into it right now. General, 2 things that have happened in the last few days, especially the swearing in of the electoral commissioners there. We have new commissioners that will be running the electoral commission. They're asking for 1 trillion shillings to ensure, one, civic competences are done, the trainings and education, but also to run the election. Your thoughts on our commissioners, but also on the new commission that has been sworn in by the Chief Justice this past week?
Unfortunately, I've not heard about the new people who have gone into it, but I really doubt whether with the current setup, whether they will do much beyond what I have watched that electoral commission, the one which has been conducting elections in the last 2 times. If there were men and women who were bold, who cared about the country more than caring about themselves, yes, there would have been risks, but they could have taken firm stands and delivered relatively well-managed elections. But unfortunately, as we've noticed in our country, most of the people who get the opportunity to occupy positions of responsibility most times consider their own livelihoods, consider their own consideration of their own security over and above the considerations of managing a credible election. And therefore, they are always very vulnerable when there are people who don't have boldness of character. The regime finds it very easy to manipulate them. And that has been the problem that we've noticed here over and over. So I don't know the 4 who have come in, the new ones. I don't know how bold they would be. But of course, with the current chairman who has been there before, they have seen him out there in the field. Most times he's very, very fearful to make bold decisions. And therefore, unless something miraculous happens, if he doesn't change in his character, it will remain the same.
You almost sound like, General, you're expecting no difference, and you expect the same results at the end of the day. Is that your notion there?
Well, we'll wait and see how the situation unfolds. Who knows? I'm someone who has learned to live day by day and always to remain hopeful. We just give them the benefit of doubt, but also keep doing our own thing. We don't have to fully put trust in them. They have to achieve that trust. They have got to buy that trust eventually because of their actions. If they continue doing the very things that they've been doing, then they remain as hopeless as they have been. But if they were to change along the way and become bold, then who knows? You can completely change the political trajectory of the country and the future which we are heading into. So we just wait and see.
General, let's get to something that is really a pain point for every ordinary Ugandan that yearns to see a better future. Nelson Mandela put it in a way and said, education is the strongest weapon. Education, when we look at the PLE results and we look at the ones that have just finished, about between 3 and 5 million sat P1 of these ones that finished P7, but only about 700 were able to get their results. Is education still relevant in this country, or are we creating haves and have-nots?
Well, education has never largely been the focus of General Museveni all the time that he has been in power. He only looks at quantity, he never looks at the quality of education. I think he gets satisfied by knowing that there are so many people who have gone into UPE. He sings over it over and over. But you can see that he never focuses on how to make it quality education like a number of other countries in the region have done. Because we are not the only ones who introduced UPE. UPE was literally a global agenda. But there are countries that focused on training teachers, motivating them and increasing them in numbers. So the teacher-student ratio is smaller than what we see here in Uganda, where you find the teacher teaching more than 100 plus children, teachers who are not well paid, teachers who are not well motivated, schools that don't have facilities like libraries, So that's the biggest challenge. And no wonder there are so many dropouts. As you indicated, 5 million. But a few years back, there were 7 million who, at the entry point, there were 7 million. And those who completed P7 were still, again, lower than 1 million. But these are statistics that I doubt whether they will help the regime in carrying out corrective actions. A regime that will carry out corrective actions would be a regime that has got people who care. These people just don't care about people. They just care about themselves largely, most of them. There are a few individuals who, in a better environment, would perform very well, but the environment doesn't give them that chance.
General, how do we find a balance? Because with a free market economy or a privatized, liberalized economy and schools charging exorbitant prices, I saw some of the traditional schools charging between 2.5 million to upwards of 4 million shillings. It is creating haves and have-nots. How do we make education an equalizer for everyone? And if you are in a position to have a change, what would you do?
We would concentrate resources in revamping the whole educational system. The curriculum is one of the target areas. Retraining of teachers, motivating them, paying them better, because at the core of a successful educational system, the teacher is the key factor. If you have got the teachers who are motivated, you'll get good results out of them. Strangely enough, the government teachers who are on government payroll are most times paid better than those who are even in private schools. You can't even understand how those who are in private schools, the performance in private schools is better than the performance in government schools. Because in government, there's a lack of supervision. And again, something which is so strange. If you look at in the times when we were in school, government schools were better than private schools. You talk to anybody who was in the primary and secondary in the 60s, in the 70s, they'll clearly tell you that the best students would go to the government schools, and those who would have failed to be admitted in government schools are the ones who would go to the private schools. Now it is the other way around. Government schools can be made better. Government has got resources. to motivate teachers, to pay them better, to have supervision systems in place, to equip libraries, to equip laboratories. And therefore, it just requires discipline and focus, nothing else. And then you reverse the trend where people are rushing into private schools because they are disappointed with government schools. And once you reverse that, then you can start enabling those who have and those who don't have, who are able to get into the government schools to get the same opportunities. Right now, the majority of the citizens cannot afford paying for their children in the private schools. The money in private schools is quite high. And the government schools, other than a few, which also charge as much as the private school charge, the majority of them, the government schools, the performance is very, very poor. And that's why you have almost two parallel systems. The poor, the children get a very poor start by going to UPE, to USE. Most of them can't make it to universities. And therefore, it is going to be a big problem because we are going to have children about 20, 30 years who have gone through poor educational systems from families that can't manage to pay for them in private schools. And those who can manage are paying for their children in private schools. And therefore, they are better off in accessing opportunities, not only here in the country, but also in the region and on the global scale, because they are competitive because of a good educational standard. That's absolutely unfortunate. And without having a government which is focused on discipline, that trend cannot be reversed. And that's why we spend a lot of time as Alliance for National Transformation to focus on the values that we keep talking about, which most people seem not to understand yet, but we believe they will be able to understand them. Because we want to attract people who are disciplined, people who are value-driven, who understand that when you take power, investing, for example, or the necessary resources and efforts into educational system, because any country, whether it has natural resources or doesn't, at the core of its development process is the human factor. Because if you don't have good, well-educated, people well-trained to manage in the private as well as in the public sector, you cannot develop on a sustained level. You simply cannot.
General, yes. General, just to jump in there, I wanted to ask you about someone that you know so well, the retired Honorable Kano Amanya Mshega, who is now running the Education Commission that is supposed to be helping with reforms in education. But you also are well aware that in between 1987 and 1989, there was still an Education Commission. What do you see coming out of there, you knowing him well? And what reforms would you recommend if you were brought before this commission looking at our curriculum and our education system?
I believe they'll produce a good report. And there are many good reports, not only in the educational sector. There are quite a number of reports that have been made. The problem is implementation. I don't think we have got the necessary discipline at the level of government to implement what will come out in the report. I mean, if there was discipline at the level of government in terms of managing resources, in terms of implementing the number of reports that have been produced, we would be moving steadily as a country on the development path. There's a lack of discipline. There's a lack of care for the public good. The driving motive or the driving factor for most people who are in government is, how do I get an opportunity to loot? That contradicts anything that would bring about what people desire. There's no way you can be driven by selfish motives and at the same time do things that will deliver services to the people. It's a contradiction in terms.
And I'm grateful you've spoken about the report. have the competence-based curriculum that is being introduced. It was introduced at all level. What are your thoughts about it? And it has been embraced by Botswana. It has been embraced by Seychelles and the education systems. Botswana in '94. What are your thoughts on this, especially looking at what we have now and what is being proposed as far back as 20?
Timothy, you need to repeat that. I didn't pick it.
Okay. General, I was asking about the new curriculum. If you can pick me now. The new curriculum that has been introduced right now, the competence-based curriculum. It is in Botswana, introduced in '94. But when you look at it vis-a-vis the heavy investment that is needed for it, can we succeed or should we stick?
The question we discuss is there discipline and focus for those who would even put it into implement it? That's where the problem lies. The problem is not in the resources, the financial resources that would enable government to implement, to put supervisory systems in place, to retrain teachers. That lacks. At the core of everything that is not working is that problem. The moment you have leaders who really are not looking at how people's livelihoods, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of nutrition, the moment you have people who just don't care about people, who care about themselves, that's going to happen. Not in education. I highly doubt. I highly doubt that they'll be able to implement whatever good there is.
General, let's look at the proposal by government to merge agencies and departments to bring them back together to their ministries. What are your thoughts about this? The president spoke about it. They were in the NRM caucus, and this was one of the things that was brought up, and the president was emphasizing the saving on 1 trillion shillings. What's your view about this merging? And these organizations or agencies are by the act or articles of the law manage this, and that can manage.
That is the second or third recommendation. I think in mid-90s is a team which had been put up, and it recommended rationalizing and also reduction of expenditure of government. It was never implemented. I highly doubt whether this will either, because when you have a regime which survives on renting support, if you have a regime which depends on appeasing its support base, compromising people by giving them jobs, there is nowhere at the same time it can cut down on the levels of those parastatals. It cannot cut down on levels, for example, of parliament. It will not cut down on cabinet, because to reduce government expenditure, because the whole purpose of rationalization would have been, one, create efficiency, but also reduce on government expenditure. But at the same time, for them to survive, they must keep giving favors to those whom they want support from. And that's why the two contradict each other. So at the end of the day, what do you think they'll go with? They are more focused on survival as a regime. And therefore, I suppose that the report will also be shareable. I highly doubt whether they have got the discipline to reach out to say, you know what, enough is enough. Let's now start carrying out the necessary reforms. But if they were conducted, that would be the best that would happen. When you look at the levels of debt, when you see the increasing levels of the population, when you see the demands because of the increasing population as well, demands in health, demands in education, demands in infrastructure, all that would require discipline. We don't have discipline, So I don't think any discipline in governance. So I doubt whether that rationalization will be done.
General, you keep saying discipline. Elucidate on discipline. Why do you keep saying we have no discipline, and how do we achieve discipline in this country?
Select, any group or any party for that matter, whether it is that one in power like NRM, whether it is those of us who want to get into power, the first thing you focus on is the selection of leaders. Leaders who will be in positions of exercising authority and responsibility. How do they manage national resources in the sectors in which they are deployed? How do you create an environment in which there are equal opportunities? That, for example, how do you put in place systems where you will employ people based on their capabilities rather than whom you know who has paid money? All that requires discipline, it requires focus. If the end state is to see a country which is developing on a sustained basis, that grows sustainably, grows its economy for purpose of investing the revenue collection from a growing economy, put in infrastructure, power, water, road infrastructure, rail transport, to put into creation of a conducive environment for those who are in the private sector to grow their industries and generate more resources. Then you put it into education, you put it into health, you put it into agriculture, so that you find that there is a country which is developing and is able to cater for the best interests of its population. If you don't have people who are disciplined, if you don't build a team of them at the national level and the lower levels at the district level where they manage budgets, there's nothing much you can do, however much money you get. I mean, we see countries that have got really huge amounts of natural resources, but at the same time who exist in levels of poverty that are unimaginable. All that goes back to that. And that's why we keep talking as Alliance for National Transformation on the issue of sourcing for attracting leaders who are value-driven. That's at the core of any solution to this mess that we find ourselves in. It doesn't matter which party will apply. Whichever party applies that formula is the party which will move the country from the mess that we find ourselves in to the correct or right direction. You can't avoid.
General, my last question on rationalization is that some of these agencies and departments have been made by an act of parliament. How do you see this being navigated to take them back to their mother ministries? How will they do that?
First, I'm really doubtful whether they will implement it. Even if they go ahead to implement it, they will implement it in a shorter way, because I don't think they will choose the best in terms of those whom they know that this is a disciplined man or disciplined woman who will go and manage, whether in the ministry or wherever they'll be placed. The deployment influence, or what influences what I see, how people are deployed, is whom do you support? Are you someone who stand your ground in terms of resisting any higher person who wants to mismanage resources? If you are someone who cannot be compromised, you will not be employed. If you're already in employment, you'll be fired if you don't end up in prison. If you don't know someone in government or you don't support the movement, you are not going to be employed. So how will it help?
General, let's get to something that has been debated over and over: the united forces of change. You were seen with other leaders in this country joining forces. What is the united forces of change? What are its objectives? What are its values? You were a value-based party. How does this really cut across?
We have common objectives. One of the objectives, which is not debatable, where everybody agrees that we need to work together, is regime change. And around that common objectives, there are a number of things that we will be meeting. First is create the platform, which we have created, that will work around what we need to do to hasten change of the regime. And as we speak, we are about maybe 1 or 2 months. It's a process. There are outreach efforts to get out to meet with civil society leaders, with the cultural leaders, with the religious leaders, to build a consensus or to rebuild it, because in the past we've had such efforts, unfortunately, which never succeeded, to see how to sustain them and focus people of goodwill. People want to see change in this country, change that will bring governance that would respond to the needs of the people. So it's a work in progress. We as Alliance for National Transformation are in it as a party. And we believe that unity is an important factor in advancing a common cause. And we are open, as we've always been. We'll keep on discussing a number of issues that would lead us to applying our common effort to achieve positive outcomes. And at the same time, concentrate on doing the things that we need to do to strengthen ourselves as an organization, because we know that moving out the regime is one thing, managing power responsibly is another. So we know that we must do a number of things simultaneously. As we work with the rest of the colleagues in the common objectives of regime change, we who recognize that power is not an end in itself, must also keep concentrating on attracting more and more people who are value-driven, so that we have got them at the core of managing of the party at the different levels, the national, the district, the sub-county. So that in the event that ANT is part of a larger group, or if at any point it was take power on its own, that would have no doubt in our mind that we would manage power responsibly, because we would have a core of value-driven leaders, and how to manage national resources, and how to create an environment where there can be opportunities, where there can be justice, where there can be fairness, where there can be accountability. That's what's been lacking the last 60-something years.
General, when we look at coalitions that have been there before, TDA, when we look at coalitions that have been in Kenya and have gotten power, there are different ambitions of the different parties, different ambitions of the different opinion leaders there. How are you going to be able to have those so that they don't supersede this one or the values that you have as objectives there? How are you going to harness and also ensure that you can those that they do not become a problem moving forward?
Yeah, the beauty of ANT is that many of our leaders, the majority of them, are people who are hopeful. So in spite of all the negative things happening in the environment, we believe that there'll be a breakthrough at some point. And therefore, in all manner of interactions we engage in, including the one of trying to build a common platform, like the one we are in now, that we are talking about, we go in with that mindset, knowing that there have been failures in the past, but that we should not give up because of the failures in the past, that we must remain hopeful that once we apply effort, all of us, and we are honest to each other, and there are certain objectives around which we agree, that we can succeed in building a credible platform around which all good men, men and women of goodwill can apply the effort in causing change in this country. Not change in terms of just taking power, but using power in a responsible manner to establish sanity in government.
General, my final question on this United Force of Change. Shall we see it present one candidate, or shall we see the same failures come back to bite you, the ghosts of TDA and the other coalitions? And the second one is, if regime change is one of the objectives, if today regime change happens, are you ready to take power, and how does that play out in the United Forces of Change?
Of the things we have so far discussed, having a common electoral platform is not an issue that we've discussed yet. And I also think that it would be premature at this point even to start engaging in that. Because for us to reach that point, we would need to have done a number of things. Build trust, build our organizational infrastructure, the different organizations that are involved. But also, too, there are also other actors who are within the platform who don't believe in election. So there's no, you can start talking about a common electoral platform when there are those who don't believe in election. So it is something that will come possibly towards the end. If we find it necessary, we can discuss it and then see what outcomes there would be. But right now, we haven't discussed it yet.
Thank you very much, General. I asked a question about regime change. If regime change happened now, is the United Forces of Change ready to grab the bull by the horns, especially metaphorically speaking, of this country, and what would that look like?
You have come again. I didn't get that clearly.
General, I was asking that one of the objectives is regime change. If regime change happened now, is the United Forces of Change ready to grab the bull by the horns? And what would that look like? How would it play out?
What do you mean if there was a regime change? Because what we're focusing on now is the regime change.
Yes, if that came to pass now, how would it play out with the United Forces of Change taking the regime, taking on power, and how would that play out?
Well, to be honest with you, that's not something that we've even touched. We are looking at how to remove the regime. We have not reached a point where we'd even be discussing how to put together the structures. We have not reached that level at all yet. So if suddenly there was a vacuum, then I believe that we would participate effectively in discussing how that vacuum would have to be managed. Because I would like to believe that sudden regime change would have to come from out of the ordinary expectation of how it would happen. Because ordinarily we would expect a regime change to come through an election, or to come through maybe if there's demise of a president, there's a constitutional provision. If the constitutional provision is followed, then, like we saw in Tanzania, then there would have to be understanding whether those who would come in would be open to discussing with the opposition in how a country can be managed. That also be a different factor. Or at times when there is a breakdown of the country, or at times when there are coups. So if anything happens suddenly, the different parties which are involved in the platform would have to be discussing exactly how to operate in a situation of crisis. And I suppose that would be all round.
General, finally on these parties, the question I would like to put to you: what are the strategies for regime change, if any, that you can share with us? How are the strategies being implemented to have this regime change?
Basically, there are two key strategies that have been playing out for the last so many years. The one of civil disobedience or mobilizing the population to a point where a population that is mobilized can mass up and push government out of power, like what we saw happened in Sudan. There are those who believe in it. There are those who've been focusing on that. There are those who've been building around that. The others who believe in building the infrastructure around the parties, around the interest groups or pressure groups, and to build the grassroots infrastructure, build the capability to influence change of a regime because of the strength of the organizations. And also within consistent with that, there are those who believe that when you are that well organized and you can mobilize the population at the grassroots level, that through that process, you can capture the lower levels of electoral positions like councillors 0C3, councillors 0C5, mayors of towns, 0C5 chairpersons, and parliament. If you're able to get a majority at that level, that it is the only way you can overwhelm this system and capture the presidency as well. So they are varied, and you find that different actors have got focuses on different. There are those who think that only one works. There are others who believe that either can work and that all of the strategies should be applied, but that there should be coordination amongst those who are applying the different strategies for the same common objective of regime change. So wait and see how they play out still. But at the end of it all, for us in Alliance for National Transformation, we are hopeful, different from how most people think, because you see a lot of frustration and desperation in the population. They think that this regime is going nowhere. In fact, our efforts is to hasten our organizational capabilities to be prepared, whether as Alliance for National Transformation or in coordination with other organizations, to be ready to occupy a vacuum in actual fact. We just talked about a while back. I wouldn't want to end up in a situation where you find that there's no organization that is ready to manage power. Because the taking of power is one thing that can happen through there are many people who have taken power in Uganda. All of them have failed to manage it. That's why we spend a lot of focus on that, how to manage it. The taking of it is a totally different question.
Interesting that you talk about managing power. Let's spread our wings a little bit. But before we get into the region, General, we just celebrated Tarehe Sita Day on the 6th of February. We just celebrated the 42nd anniversary of the NRM. Do we still celebrate? Is there anything to still celebrate on these days? Your thoughts about this, having been Command 1, is there anything still to celebrate on the NRM Day and the Tarehe Sita Day that was just on Tuesday?
Well, unfortunately, the NRM is a baggage on UPDF. So until that baggage is removed, UPDF will keep paying the price of the ugly image that they bear because of the wrong political decisions by the NRM. Otherwise, the UPDF as an army, once there is a good environment, political environment, it is easier for the officers and men who are educated, there are quite a number of them who love their country, to conduct the necessary reforms and recapture the image of UPDF. It is full of officers and men who, sacrifice amid so many challenges that they face internally, externally. So I believe it will be in their best interest when the baggage that they carry is removed. And then hopefully there will be a more disciplined political group that can create the necessary environment in which the army can play its legitimate role in nation building.
General, let's switch gears to our last topic here. And I would also like to encourage the ones on Spaces, Zoom, or YouTube, wherever you are, whichever platform, please send your messages. We'll be getting into them in the last minute there so that the general can be responding to them. So drop your message on whatever platform. I will be getting them here to be able to respond. General, let's talk about the tension in the region. There's tension between Burundi and Rwanda. There's tension between Rwanda and DRC. There's tension between Tanzania and Kenya there on trade. What are your thoughts on this tension? There's also tension with IGAD and especially in Sudan with two forces there. What are your thoughts about these tensions that are happening within the region? And could they spill over into countries that are not involved, like Uganda?
What is quite disheartening, actually quite disheartening, because what one would have expected of the leaders of African countries would have been that they would be seeing the opportunity that there is on a global scale. Africa is well positioned if it is well managed at the country level and if there's good coordination to exploit the opportunities that there are for the benefit of the countries and the continent as a whole. As the growing population, we are expected to hit 2.3 billion people by 2040, 2050. A young population, if it is well educated, if it is well facilitated, as the world focuses on China now, so the world focus on Africa. If the leaders have got the necessary discipline and focus and foresightedness to do the things which are necessary. So it's disheartening in the sense that in spite of all those opportunities, if they were grasped, that we are fighting over peripheral issues. I mean, you just simply can't understand. Because the fights which are going on are neither ideological, nor are they on something that is serious. It's just simply short-sightedness, nothing else.
General, how do you suggest these are resolved, especially looking at us being a landlocked country and depending on most of these countries that are by the sea or by the ocean? How do you see it being resolved? Is diplomacy an option, or is the military the only option here?
Diplomacy would be the best route to take. Well, look at the problem in DRC. DRC now has close to about 100 million people. DRC is, if you had to compare actually Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, you'll fit it in DRC, and still DRC is larger than the whole of East Africa combined. DRC shares borders with 5 of the 7 partners. Shares borders with South Sudan, shares a border with Uganda, shares a border with Rwanda, shares a border with Burundi, shares a border with Tanzania. 5. And also, the whole of Eastern Congo trade through Dar es Salaam, trade through Mombasa. So in geographical terms, Congo unavoidably has to work closely with East Africa. So if all these countries were having a larger picture, they would be sitting to say, how do we exploit this opportunity that is available on the global scale? How to create stability in Congo so that infrastructure can be built, roads established, power lines, rail lines, and steady growth, economic growth in DRC would not only help DRC, it also help the East African economy. But diplomacy is the best solution, not a military solution. So there's no country which is going to go and occupy another and dominate. Diplomacy would be helped by focus on what is in the common interest of the whole East African region. As I've already indicated, see the question of DRC, sharing borders with 5 countries. And the 6th country, which is Kenya, there's no way DRC can use Mombasa unless it is in good relations with Kenya. So I simply can't understand when they meet, like the 7 leaders meet. I don't know how they discuss. I don't know what they see. But the late Mwalimu Nyerere, may God rest his soul in eternal peace. The late Mwalimu Nyerere was a very humble man. He almost delayed the independence of Tanzania because he had wanted the unity of East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. And he had even offered that he would relinquish leadership. He didn't have takeover leadership. Unfortunately, many others weren't looking at things that way. And around that time, the 60s, someone said that many African leaders want to be big fish in small ponds, rather than being small fish in a large lake. That's the mentality of many of these African leaders, and that's where the problem stems from. So the moment we get rid of that, then the solutions will be available. So let's hope that in the number of countries that are on this continent, not only here in the region, that you get more and more leaders who are more focused on how their people can be better governed, how their people can access opportunities, how they can access services. Leaders who are value-driven, not driven by ego, not driven by selfish motives. We have seen those examples. We have seen examples in the Far Eastern countries. We saw what the leaders in Singapore did. We saw what leaders did in Malaysia. We saw what leaders did in Singapore. And they built strong foundations on the basis of which those countries are prospering. You come back to our countries, mentality of the 60s still survives. 60s, spilled into the 70s, the 70s spilled into the 80s, 80s spilled into the 90s, 90s spilled into the 20s. Just can't understand what goes on this. So we'll keep at it, because what we are doing in Alliance for National Transformation is related to that. And I would like to believe that all parties in this region of East Africa, that those that would want to radically transform the trajectory of politics and the nature of governance in the country, that they will focus on recruiting and building a foundation on the basis of which value-driven leaders take the center stage. That's the solution. There's no way you can avoid that. I've seen many changes on this continent. And leaders keep doing the same thing. Different faces, different backgrounds in terms of religion, different backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, but same mindset, same actions. The only way that can change is what is the character and nature of the leaders. That's why the issue of value-driven leaders is a critical factor. People may, ignore it for a while, but hopefully many people will reach that same conclusion. There's no human being that will give you what they don't have. So our organization, because you have an organization that has got the dominant force within it for people who are value-driven, that's what they apply when they're in power. If the dominant force in a political organization is of those who want to loot or feather their nests, when they're in power, that's exactly what will be driving them. And therefore, they go on a looting spree. We have seen this happen over and over. I just can't understand how people cannot make the conclusion which is necessary to be made, that the only way out of the mess in which we are, not only in Uganda, but even at the regional level, is a lack of value-driven leaders. Period. So we'll keep at it ourselves in Alliance for National Transformation, and we hope that our message will keep on, expanding and getting to people who have the same thinking and the same desires as we have, who also know that there are a number of sacrifices that they must undertake to be able to build such organization. Because if you have a country where you have more than one party, maybe one or two or three, that's also a safeguard. Because the moment one party, for whatever reason, if it's voted out of power and another one gets it, then you know that the only variation there would be maybe is on how to apply a different policy position from the one that would have left power. But in regard, for example, to how to manage national resources, that there is commonality, that all of them will be transparent in managing national resources, that all of them would be zero tolerant corruption. And that's why it is necessary for all of us to keep focused on that. Many, keep talking about that in some of them in a derogatory way. I keep reading like on social media. I just can't simply understand how people can't make a conclusion that is so obvious. How they fail to make such a conclusion. So Timothy, we will keep at that. Fortunately, the outreach program that we've been going to in the rural areas where we've been, we're encouraged by the number of people who are attracted, who share the same views as we do, hold, and keep on expanding. Because the wastage of resources is not only at the national level, you find at the district level, you find at the sub-county level, and many times, regardless of whether it's an RM leader, whether it is an opposition leader, it's a disease. But people think that getting into a position of responsibility is not an opportunity to serve, but it's an opportunity to loot. That's what we have to uproot. The only way you can uproot them is get leaders who think different. There's no way you're going to get them unless you reach out to them. And if more and more are built, and you find like in an organization like the Alliance for National Transformation, you find that 7 out of 10, or the best case scenario, 8, 9, you can never have 100% that they are value driven. So we'll keep at it, and hopefully we'll also motivate others to do the same thing. And therefore, to also create hope in our population to know that, you know what, at least when a party which has a majority of leaders, the dominant force within that party being value-driven leaders, that it can resuscitate hope and also create an environment where people recognize that we are as capable as people from any other continent where we have seen developments take place on a sustained basis. Right now, when you look at our situation here in Africa, it's like we are so inept. We have got natural resources. We've got many people who are educated now. It's not like at independence time. The problem is at the leadership level, always. That's what we want to focus on until we break out of that. And I believe by God's grace, we will break out of that. At least that's where we are focused as Alliance for National Transformation.
Thank you so much, Geno. Unfortunately, we have lost Timothy and he's not coming back online, but we are grateful that he was able to hold the conversation for the last about an hour's time with Geno. And we apologize for the challenges we've had on the spaces today. Something happened and we could not really get it right while the spaces had just started. But for those ones who hung in there, I can understand you are largely listening to Geno and not listening to the moderator. Sincere apologies onto that. But we are glad that you hung in there, and we will keep improving on this to make sure that we keep getting in touch with the audience going forward. Please stay in. as far as we are concerned on the technical side, on the let me be very clear here, on the 23rd of this month, we shall be having our only local LC5 chairperson in ANG, who is the chairperson of Terego, will be sharing with us what is happening in Terego and how he is exercising his right, as well as displaying the kind of quality leadership it is supposed to be within Terego. So stay tuned. Stay tuned to that on 23rd at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. General, I would like to request that you give your parting shots so that we can close this. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying on, whether online, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter, on the spaces. Over to you, General, as we close.
Thank you, Servin. I would like to thank all the people who've put aside their time to participate in this conversation on the different platforms. I'd also like to apologize for the technical glitches that arose. Also to thank you for hanging on. And those who are Ugandans, our request to you is please join whatever party you believe in and build towards better governance. Make the necessary sacrifices so that we can turn our country around. May God bless you all.
Thank you so much, General, and to everyone else who was listening in. Thank you for joining in, and may the Lord richly bless you. Have a blessed weekend. Bye for now. Sorry, General, we noticed a challenge a little later, and we tried to rectify it, but it didn't come very well. Although we had you all through.
I noticed that on my screen, Timothy disappeared, and I had to keep on until he until he would come back.